Today I'm going to show you how to do this animation from one of Iman Gadzhi's videos. Initially this looks pretty simple, but if you're not familiar with setting up rigs for rotations and circular graphics like this, it can be pretty tricky. The best thing is, I'm going to show you how to do this without plugins and rig everything up manually. So it's a pretty good video if you want to get better with expressions or building more complex controllers. So I'm here in After Effects, and let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to make that grid that you see in all of Iman Gadzhi's videos. It's actually very simple to do. I'm just going to make a new solid, and it could be any color, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to come over here and add a grid effect to this. And I'm just going to set it to something that looks nice. Use the width slider here and just bring it up. And I think this looks pretty good. Next thing I'm going to do is add a turbulent displace to this, and that's going to give us that wavy lines that he has. And that's a little too much. I found something like 5 looks best, like 5 or 4. And then this evolution is how he gets that movement. So I'm going to hold Alt on this evolution and just set a quick expression, which is going to be time times 100. And that's just going to turn that around infinitely for as long as our composition is alive. So you can see we're getting slight movement in that. Okay, so I'm going to rename this to grid so everything's organized. And next thing we're going to do is add a new solid as well. And this is going to be a gradient map. So I'm going to call this gradient. And I'm going to come over here to my effects and add a gradient map to this. I'm going to flip the colors here so it's white at the top. So I'm going to set this to overlay blend mode. Next, I'm going to bring down the opacity just so it's not as harsh. And I think that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and add one more solid, and that's going to act as our background. And I'm just going to make it like a little bit of a lighter black. And I'm going to bring that all the way to the bottom. And I think that's pretty good. Now we can actually get into the fun stuff. So now I'm going to go ahead and create the numbers that are going to be spread out around the circle. So I'm just going to type in 1 for now, and the font he uses is called Montserrat. It should be a default font in After Effects, so I'm just going to do regular. Actually, I might go ahead and do bold. And I'm just going to scale this up so it's easy to see. And I'm going to set this fill to be pure white. I'm going to go ahead and hide everything else so it's easier to work on. So the first thing I'm going to do is center this into the center of the composition, and I'm going to click this up here aligned to top, so it goes to the very top. Then I'm going to hit Y to get my anchor point tool, and I'm going to bring this anchor point down to what I want the center of my circle to be. So I think this is a little bit too big, so I'm just going to scale this down a little bit. And then once again, come back to the alignment and take this to the top. So the next thing I'm going to do is add a new, and I'm going to add a new object. I'm going to call this the circle controller. And I'm going to come over here and add an angle controller to this. And I'm going to duplicate this once. So if we come into the rotation property of this and we hit Alt, we can write out expression. I'm going to parent this rotation to the second layer's rotation. But we're not going to actually use it for anything. We just want to get this number here. So instead of actually parenting this to the second layer, we're going to parent it to index +1. And what this is doing is the index is basically the layer number. So since this is the 4th layer from the bottom in the composition, this is going to be index number 4. So when we do index +1, this parents the rotation to the layer above it. So if we were to have another layer above this and we had the same expression on this layer 2, it would be parented to layer 3, if that makes sense. The next thing we want to do is add the rotation from this angle control to the rotation of our layer. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up, and I'm going to hit lock right here so this stays open. And I'm going to come here, I'm going to do plus just to add, and we can just pip whip this to the angle control. So now when we control this angle control, it's going to rotate this number around this pivot point, which is where our anchor tool is. So now I want to have 7 numbers like I did in my example. I'm going to take this expression from the rotation. I'm just going to copy and paste it to all of these. And now if we rotate this, it should be spreading them out. So the next thing we want to do, since we have 7 of these and our circle is 360 degrees, we're just going to take 360 and divide it by 70. And you can do the math right here inside of your expression window. And it looks like 51 is what we need. So the next thing I'm going to do is come in here and just change these numbers to be exactly what we need. So I think I did this a little bit too big, so I'm just going to go ahead and scale this down. And I'm actually not liking that bold anymore, so I'm going to go back to regular on this. And maybe change the font size here just to be a little bit smaller. Yeah, I think it's looking pretty good. I think something like that is good as well. I'm going to take this controller here and just put it in the center, and also center this anchor point as well. Just so everything's nice and clean here. I'm also going to take all of these Legos, and I'm going to send them to a pre-comp. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-C, and make sure you have the second one selected. I'm just going to call this, I'll call it something like spinner. And I'm going to come into this pre-comp, and I'm going to bring everything down just a little bit, so it's more in the center of our comp, just to make it a little bit more clean. So the next thing we need to do is add these horizontal dividers between each line. And to do this is a little bit different than how we did this initially. Since they're all the same, we don't really need to rotate them around a pivot point. But we need them to kind of bend in and distort inside. And if you look at my example, you could see they're kind of bending in or distorting in a little bit as it gets closer to the center. So I'm going to show you a pretty easy way to do that. If I had this compass, you can see it a little bit easier. So let me show you how to do that real quick. So I'm going to take a line tool and just draw a quick stroke. I'm going to set my stroke color to be white. And I'm going to come out to the stroke settings. So come in shape, stroke, and then I'm just going to turn up the dashes. I'm going to zoom in so we can see this a little bit better. I'm going to set this to something like this. I think is good. So I'm going to put this in the center of the comp. I'm going to go ahead and take this angle point and put it in the center as well. So I'm just going to come over here to add, and we're going to add a repeater to this. And come into the repeater settings, and we need 7 of these since we have 7 numbers. And I'm going to set this offset to something like 4. Probably -4 just so it's not all the way off the screen. I'm going to add some spacing to this, so if you come into transform, you can mess with the position. And just make it a little bit more fanned out. Maybe make this -5. Just so everything fits on the screen, let's try -3. So the next thing we're going to do is add a polar coordinates to this. And what a polar coordinates does is it takes your Lego hill and it's going to take whatever's a rectangle and try and morph it into a circle. So you could kind of think of this like polar coordinates on a globe. So it takes a flat map and kind of curves it into a globe shape. So I'm going to do rect to polar instead of polar to rect, since we want to take a rectangle and turn it into polar coordinates, which is that sphere shape. And I'm going to turn this all the way up for the interpolation. And you can see that gave us our shape that we needed. So I'm going to come down here and mess with the position a little bit more, just so it looks how we need it. So you want to make sure you're using the transform under the repeater when you do this. I'm going to bring this up. And I think that's pretty good space between everything. I'm going to create a new null for this so we can actually control it. And I'm going to parent this to the null. And we'll just move this null. So I'm actually not too happy with how wide this is, so I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller. So I'm just going to come into these line settings on this stroke and change the line just to be a little bit more thin. Okay, so I think it's looking pretty good. I'm going to rename this to be divider. And one thing I like to do is just make all of these one color. I like to do green for my controllers just so they're easy to find in the composition. And I like to keep them at the top as well. So the next thing we're going to do is that shape that comes around it as just a circle. So I'm just going to go ahead and create that. I just play with the size a little bit. Let me bring this fill to be off so we can see it pretty easily. And just going to give it some more space here. So I'm just eyeballing it. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to take this and duplicate it and then just bring it in and do the same thing for the inner. And I think that's pretty good. I'm going to call one of these the outer and one of these the inner. And I think that's pretty good. I actually want to set this outer to the very bottom because we're going to create an animation with this. And we basically want to set this as a mat for all these layers. So we come here, we set the mat to this. We'll also come up here and set this fill to be black now. And we want the divider to be matted to this as well. So now when we say we were to scale this in, everything should be hidden. And it's going to help us later when we animate this coming in. And I'm going to go ahead and show this later too, because when you mat it, it automatically hides it. So now when we do that explosive effect that we did in the example, it should hide everything up until it needs to be shown. I'm just going to mess with these keyframes a little bit and get them looking nice. I like to set this to easy ease, and I like to set it to come in fast and then just kind of slow down. I think that's a pretty good effect. So to make all of these rotate now, I'm going to go ahead and create a new controller. And I'm going to rename this spinner controller. And I'm going to take this divider controller here and this divider here and pre-comp it. So we're not messing with the polar coordinates anymore, we're just messing with what's essentially just a baked in image. Next, I'm going to go ahead and create a null. And I'm going to name this spinner controller. So I'm going to take this pre-comp and this circling controller, and I'm going to parent them to the spinner controller. So we just need to take these as well and parent them to the spinner controller as well. So now if you rotate it, they should all rotate. So next thing I'm going to do is kind of fix these numbers. You can see they're already pushed to the edges. So you could just take these numbers and just go through and readjust them to be how you want them. I'm just going to eyeball it. It doesn't need to be super perfect or anything like that. So I like that. I think it's looking pretty good. The next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and build out this animation where we have it twisting as well as it first comes in. So I'm going to use the spinner controller to do that, and I'm just going to keyframe this rotation. So I'm going to set it at 0 to start, and then I want it to do one full rotation. So I'm going to come down here where it says 0 and just change it to, maybe we'll do 2 full rotations. So put that back and see how it looks. Yeah, it looked a little weird for a minute though. I think it's just going too fast. So I'm going to actually change this to 1 because I think it looks a little bit better. And I'm going to come in here just like we did before and mess with the keyframing. So it starts fast and slows down, kind of like a roulette wheel. Actually, would it would have a lot of energy and just gradually slow down. Okay, I think that's pretty good. So next we're going to do a little bit of stylization to this. So something you see a lot in Iman Gadzhi's videos is he uses the glow effect. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new adjustment layer. And I'm going to rename this to be glow. And I'm just going to add a glow on this. So I'm pretty sure he uses a plugin called Deep Glow. But I'm just going to use the normal glow because that's what I have. And probably most of you have that as well. So sometimes it looks good if you duplicate this glow. I think it's a little too extreme for this case. I'm also going to come in here to this outer circle and set the fill just to be a little bit of an off black instead of a pure black. And it might be better to add the glow to this. Let's see. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is come back in our main composition. And I'm going to go ahead and center this up a bit. I'm going to turn everything back on. So for some more stylistic things you could do is add a glow to this grid as well. And I'm also going to add an adjustment layer on this layer. And I'm going to come over here and add a vignette. I'm going to rename this vignette. I'm just going to crank this up just a little bit. And I think our background is a little too dark, so I'm just going to change that as well, hitting Ctrl-Shift-Y to change the color here. Bring this just to be a little bit darker. So I'm also going to go ahead and bring in my compass image now. And the image I'm using has a little bit of a nozzle up here, so I'm just going to go ahead and mask that out real quick. I just need a rectangle mask for this, and we can just do it like this and mess with the path a little bit. Try it's hidden. So I think that's pretty good. I'm just going to go ahead and put this in the center here. I'm going to lock this mask so I don't mess with it, trying to resize the layer. Just put it in the circle, it's fine. Alright, so to really make this fit in just a little bit more, I'm going to take the curves and add the curves effect to this compass and just kind of mess with it until it fits in just a little bit more to the composition. So I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to come back into this layer and I'm going to turn motion blur on for everything. And I'm going to go ahead and turn that off now, just so we have pretty quick window times. And we'll come back later and turn that back on. So I'm going to add a new solid. And I'm going to call this solid green. And I'm going to come over here to the green effect. And I'm going to use add green. And go ahead and set this viewing mode to be final output. And we want this to be monochromatic. So come here under color and just select monochromatic. And I think the default settings are pretty good for this. You can mess around with it a little bit if you want. Actually, I like how the softness is up. We're going to put this at the very top of our comp, but under the MEA. And I'm just going to set the blend mode on this to be screen. And if that's a little too intense for you, you could just lower the opacity a little bit, and it should look a little bit better. Next thing I'm going to do is add one more adjustment layer. And I'm going to call this posterize. And I'm going to add the posterize camera effect to this. And I think number like 12 looks pretty good for his videos, so I'm going to do that. And to really finish this off, I'm going to do one more thing, which is add that film grit. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in a overlay for that. So I've got my overlay in. I'm just going to go ahead and bring it down. And if I scrub through it, you can see it's just adding these little film particles to it. And I'm going to set this blend mode to be screen. So this is our final effect. You can play around with the size of the compass too and kind of have it come out at the same time as a spinner, like I did in the intro. And that tends to look pretty nice. Hopefully you learned something from this. And you learned a few things about Iman Gadzhi's style as well. If you like this tutorial, check out my other videos on my channel. I have more tutorials like this, as well as other editing styles. And that's all.